Folks, as we await the Winnipeg Jets to make some major moves or do something of interest, I thought it would be time to slow it down a little bit and see how the rest of the Central Division continues to evolve their rosters. Obviously, some of these teams are a little bit cash strapped, and there are a variety of different motivations, different ambitions and goals, and maybe some teams that just don't really care and are looking to start over. We'll take a look at which teams might threaten the Jets next season and which ones you can probably safely write off, all coming right up on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HOLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thank you for choosing to make Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Megaphone, Odyssey, and YouTube. Doing so is completely free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just really love and appreciate your support. Now, talking about tonight, I thought it would be worth going through the rest of the Central Division and seeing how a lot of our rivals are approaching this offseason. Obviously, quite a few teams have made some interesting changes to their teams. Some haven't really moved the needle a lot. I think a lot of squads out there are mostly trying to figure out things internally first, because in terms of there being a lot of cap space and a lot of salary available, well, most teams are not really in that position. So, given the amount of restrictions on teams, you're looking at the Central Division and you're kind of wondering, okay, a lot of teams are running it back next season. If the Jets are among this group, where might they rank, and how do they stack up against some of these squads? Which ones are the most competitive? And kind of kicking us off, we're going to take a look at the Chicago Blackhawks, because among any of these Central Division teams, I would say the Hawks have had the most radical change. Now, I would not say it's for the better. Chicago hasn't really made themselves particularly competitive. I think, if anything, they have really gutted the team in a way that I was not really expecting. Aside from like some additions on the lower end, like Andreas Athanasiou and guys like Max Domi, who are just signing like a 1-year deal. Colin Blackwell is also joining for cheap. He's joining for like 2 years, and he's just over a little over $1 million per year. Generally speaking, they've had more of an exodus of talent than anything. We've watched Alex DeBrincat go in that major blockbuster trade to the Ottawa Senators. We've seen Henrik Borgstrom get released. Not that Borgstrom was a particularly large player in this organization or anything, but certainly he's moved on to the Washington Capitals, and he's actually joined by another Blackhawk who also just cut ties with this organization. We have seen, of course, Dylan Strome sign with the Caps for just 1 year. And look, I know that Strome might not move the needle to some people, but in terms of what he meant to the Hawks, he was like a pretty legit top 6 attacker. So it is actually a pretty notable loss. In net, they have ended up bringing in Peter Mrazek, which, I mean, Mrazek, if you're looking to tank, is probably about as useful a goalie as you can possibly get for this objective. Obviously, the Hawks don't really have, even before Mrazek, they didn't really have any true number one netminder. I mean, they had like Kevin MacKinnon, and I don't even remember who else. Fleury had spent some time there as well last year, and of course then got moved to a different team. So overall, I don't really know what their whole objective is. I feel like there's two like schools of thought for me here. Either they know that they're really bad and they're purposely trying to tear this team apart and put it on the track towards like a lottery pick next year, or they think that this is okay and they're trying to, I don't know, maybe make some deals that they think are going to shore up the future, but they don't realize just how much they're gutting. I don't know if they think that they'll be competitive next season. It's kind of hard to tell because they didn't exactly do that well in the DeBrincat trade. But, I mean, I don't know. They drafted pretty well, so I kind of feel like given the additions of Korchinski, Nazar, and some of the other prospects that they've brought in, I feel like they're trying to force guys like Kane and Taves out by making this team as uncompetitive as possible. And it seems like they're not really too concerned about how they do it. That's just a personal opinion. I don't really know if this is truly the case in their front office, but my thought is they might be trying to tear this team apart and basically burn away all the vestiges of the Bowman era as much as possible and eventually get Kane and Taves to just give in and accept a trade because um, those guys are nearing the ends of their careers. And quite frankly, I think the Hawks would love nothing more than to try and cut all ties with anyone associated to the Kyle Beach era. So, yeah, a strange one. We also saw Kirby Doc get sent to Montreal, and that led to the pick that they used on Frank Nazar and another 2022 third round pick. I think they got out of that one Gavin Hayes. Don't know a lot about Hayes, but certainly Nazar was one of my top prospects this year. Somebody that I thought would have been really cool to join the Jets if he had fallen to that first rounder for the Winnipeg Jets. But overall, yeah, Chicago definitely is on the backslide towards like a lotto team, and to me, it just feels like they're preparing to tank. And certainly, if you're bringing in guys like Stalock and Mrazek in net, and basically gutting your forward core, barring just one or two of your mainstay players, yeah, I mean, I think they are most definitely on the way to pretty much imploding. But again, as long as it's intentional, I don't disagree with this approach. But they just might want to get a better return for some of their superstar players like DeBrincat, because if they are having a fire sale and they're just burning all of these ties for cheap, not really setting yourself up for a lot of success down the long term, right? You want to make sure that you're getting max returns because otherwise it just looks like you're really embarrassing yourself. But hey, at least with the picks that they've acquired from some of these trades, they got two top end prospects in Korchinski and Nazar. So I suppose that it is probably according to their plan. Now, as far as the rest of the Central Division is concerned, some teams have made a couple of major moves. I think Colorado is one of the more interesting ones, and we'll check in with them in just a little bit to see how they are approaching their first post Stanley Cup season under the Joe Sakic era. But before we go any further, I do want to shout out one of our wonderful partners at betonline.net. For those of you who have heard me talk about BetOnline before, you know that I'm not personally super into online betting. I don't know how it works, but even as a complete newbie, BetOnline really made it as easy as possible. I was able to bet on a Bundesliga match and actually won the bet, which is pretty darn cool. But they explained all the statistical information, how you'd cast your bet, lines, odds, and all that stuff. And really, it couldn't be easier. But more than just being an online betting site, they've also got tons of information for you, including live updates and scores, news, league reviews, podcasts, and everything in between. They're more of like a true sports fans website that just also happens to be a hub for online betting. And they've got tons of sports, from Major League Baseball to NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. Heck, I've seen them even do Triple Crown racing odds. So if you're into all that stuff, you should be sure to check them out. They've also got Vegas casino games for those of you who don't really like sports, but still want to get in on the action. Getting started really couldn't be easy. Just go to betonline.net to create a free account on your laptop or mobile device, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We are taking a look around the league at how the Central Division is shaping up for the upcoming season. A number of teams have had a couple of pretty drastic makeovers, but not all of them have seemingly done as much as squads like Chicago. Before we take a look at our next team that is going to have a few renovations, especially after winning a cup, I do want to let you know, first off, again, thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, but I also wanted to let you know about a really big thing for many of you who are probably NFL fans. A lot of you are probably trying to get ready for the next season because there has been some pretty drastic movements around the NFL, and obviously predicting which players are going to be the most impactful for your fantasy odds, it's always a bit of a challenge and a bit of a fun guessing game. But Locked On is here to help. If you're wondering which NFL stars move the betting line the most, you need to be checking out Locked On NFL starting July 18th. They will give you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Again, it is available July 18th on Locked On NFL wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Same place that you can find our podcasts. Again, it's free to subscribe, so be sure to check them out and get started on your NFL season early. Now, swinging back to the teams around the Central, I thought it would next be worth taking a look at Colorado because this team has certainly made a number of interesting changes. Most of their players, for the broad majority, are kind of coming back. Right, this is a team that didn't have a ton of cap space to work with, but has made some changes. In net, though, they've definitely downgraded in quality. They ended up letting Darcy Kemper go to the Washington Capitals for a pretty hefty contract out there in Washington. And instead, they've brought in Alexander Georgiev. And then I think on the back end for like their number two, they had Jacob McDonald, or I don't know. I'm not sure who their backup is going to be because they've got a couple of goalies under contract, a lot of prospects and stuff, but I don't know. Somebody who's an Avs fan might want to fill me in here because my best guess is it's like Pavel Francouz. Francouz is probably the most likely candidate, but if that's your one-two punch in net, I don't know that Georgiev necessarily has the best track record, but this organization is also very smart. They seemingly find and identify great talents for cheap all the time, and Kemper gave them pretty much elite results for most of his tenure. So, yeah, I mean, I guess they've always been a team that works in the margins and finds really good value, but you start looking at their contract extensions, and it's getting a little bit interesting. Josh Manson came back for a 4-year deal for $18 million over the entire time, which is almost $5 million per season, just under it. Pretty expensive, I think, for what he brings. Maybe they felt that he was an irreplaceable part of this team, and they're kind of betting on his form for the Avs being the longer term form that they're going to get from him over the course of the contract. And maybe they feel like the cap hit in term is easily movable, but yeah, not sure I would have gone that route with the limited cap space that they do have. But they've also brought back Arturi Lehkonen for 5 years at, again, just a little bit over $4 million per season. I think that that's a pretty good value contract. I like the extension. I think it makes a lot of sense. But ultimately, the biggest one, of course, was getting Valeri Nichushkin under contract at 8 years for $49 million over the duration. This was a huge push for them. And, Nichushkin got a massive raise, but also, I think he probably could have gotten a little bit more on the open market. He's a monster of a player, one of their best space creators and attackers, and truly just a force of nature. But they considered him one of the most important parts of this team, and I would agree. I think he was a really critical part of their top six, and I was curious to know if he would walk or if they would bring him back because they've always tried to exploit the margins and bring in players on really value signings at first or trades where they're not giving up much, but they're getting a ton for the cap hit. This time, though, I think they've kind of gone the opposite way of trying to extend their window by bringing it back and mostly filling in the margins with a few additional players like Brad Hunt, who signed for 2 years at around a little over or just at league minimum, which I think Brad Hunt for 2 years, you're getting a very decent AHL defender and somebody who can be your seventh D and provide some offensive punch, even if his game is not exactly well-rounded. Darren Helm also coming back for a little over $1 million for 1 year, another decent value signing, somebody who played a pretty solid defensive role. And I mean, you just look at this team and I mean, they're really great. I also think that they're very cognizant of the core kind of having a bit of a shakeup in the next couple of years once MacKinnon's deal runs out. But for the time being, they're going to run it back as much as possible and try for the mythical 2 or 3 cup run. Obviously, Tampa Bay came really close to pulling it off, but then fell to, this team. So Colorado is probably poised to make the most of it and actually get closer than anyone else if they can pull it off over the next couple of seasons. But I have a lot of faith in this team. I think that they're one of the most progressive squads out there, and they didn't really have to make all that many additions. They're smart. They know how to find value in places where other teams have left market inefficiencies available. So, yeah, great squad in Colorado. One team, though, before we pause real quick, that I think is also worth shouting out that hasn't really made a ton of huge changes, but did make a couple of interesting acquisitions is Dallas. This team is under, of course, a new head coach with Peter DeBoer. I'm not really a big DeBoer fan, but I mean, you go from Bones to DeBoer, I guess it's roughly the same thing, so I don't know how much really changed. But they brought in Colin Miller and Mason Marchment. Marchment, of course, is a really great winger and a fantastic player that I thought was probably not going to last too long with his previous team, which of course was the Panthers. I mean, he was going to be very expensive, and so I think it was a very smart signing. He got a big raise. He's an awesome player. He was part of a very, very nasty Panthers offense. But, at $4.5 million per season, the Panthers just didn't really have the cap space. Dallas, though, they're getting a very good top six upgrade, and certainly somebody who would, I think, step in for Alexander Radulov and do nicely. Colin Miller, at one point, I think, was probably one of the more hotly contested names among hockey Twitter. This guy used to be the defender that everyone talked about. He's decent, right? You're getting a solid top four right-handed defender. I don't know if he's like that amazing these days, but for around just under $2 million per season, I don't think you can really complain. This is a very cheap contract, and somebody who can at least give them a little bit of depth, especially with the loss of John Klingberg, because Klingberg definitely ain't coming back. And Colin Miller, I think he'll probably do about the same job. But John was obviously a really pivotal part of that power play and stuff. Miller maybe not nearly as effective as Klingberg, but Klingberg himself wasn't nearly that great these days either. So all in all, I think a fairly quiet offseason for this team. They made some extensions like Denis Gurianov coming back for 1 year, but other than that, not a lot to say here. They did make one change with Scott Wedgwood in net, but aside from that, Dallas is going to have to just sort of roll with what they've got, and I think they're probably looking to really improve in the draft. I don't know how they did this year. Some of the prospects that they've picked up, I'm not super familiar with, but aside from that, again, I think that this is a team that still sits in like the middle of the Central Division pack. I don't know that they're like outstanding, but that group is going to be just okay, most likely under DeBoer. So not a squad that I am super concerned about. Up next, though, we'll take a look at the Minnesota Wild. This is a team that is probably another middle-of-the-pack squad, and they've got some real serious issues, especially around their superstar in Kirill Kaprizov. But we'll take a look about that in just a little bit, right after the break. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Jets. We are taking a brief look around the Central Division and trying to get a sense of what next season's top Central teams are going to be looking like. We've gone through Chicago, who are basically tearing everything apart. The Avs, who are trying to bring it back and roll it back as much as possible with a championship core. And then Dallas, who have made some small improvements here and there, but probably nothing to make them a true contender out either in the Central Division or in the NHL at large. Minnesota, kind of in a similar boat, I would say, to Dallas, but certainly in the long term, I think Minnesota is very, very set up well. They had a fantastic draft, one of the best drafts of any of the teams this year. I think that they were super smart in getting guys like Danila Yurov and Liam Öhgren, especially where they were taken. This, I think, is going to make them very happy. I expect them to be a very dangerous team down the road. And then, of course, the Fiala trade, I think that they got a pretty okay-ish return. Brock Faber is legit going to slide into their top four defense, probably for the foreseeable future. And, of course, with the number 19 pick, that was where they got Öhgren. And Öhgren seems like he's an extremely talented winger. So this is a team with a pretty bright future. Jesper Wallstedt signed a contract earlier this year. Seems like he'll be coming to their AHL system or maybe even Minnesota itself sooner rather than later. And then just recently, they've traded out Cam Talbot for Philip Gustafsson. And last I recall, I thought Gustafsson was having a pretty okay season with the Sens, but Talbot hadn't really done a lot with this team. Unfortunately for Cam, he's just on the older side, and honestly, he's not that impressive. But I think Gustafsson has some decent upside, and maybe behind this really locked down defense, this will be a team that's going to actually look a little bit better and finally get those extra few saves that always seem to evade the Wild during the postseason. Aside from that, though, they really haven't made any other crazy deals. The only thing that they really did was bring in Jacob Middleton for a 3-year contract. Not bad. I think Middleton's a legit decent top 4 defender. But Marc-Andre Fleury, they have also signed for a 2-year deal. He's okay, right? I think they would expect somebody like maybe Wallstedt or one of their other goalies in their system to at some point start to take some starts away from him. I can't really imagine that Fleury in this current state is going to be that much better than Talbot. He didn't really have a crazy run with the Wild, even backing up Talbot in that initial trade. So, yeah, Minnesota, I kind of look at as like a middle of the pack team, but I think in a few seasons, as their prospects start filtering in, they'll be a much more dangerous squad. But the whole Kaprizov situation in Russia right now, where honestly, I don't even know if they know where he is or if he's been able to leave yet, but really ugly. And I think that they're probably very concerned about the likelihood that he even returns to North America anytime soon, wishing him the best and hope that he stays safe. Because, of course, that whole military ID thing has been a very serious issue. But until that is resolved, this team as is, it's just okay. I think that they're not really expected to be a top end contender. And, you're looking at the departures of some of their older players, not really, again, expecting a massive season. Looking at the Nashville Predators up next, another team that had a really good draft. I think next to Minnesota, they might have even had a slightly better one. They got Joakim Kamel for a crazy pick. And of course, Kamel has now signed a contract because, of course, he has. He's a phenomenally talented player, somebody that I thought the Jets really should have gone after. But, of course, they ended up going with Rucker McGroarty at their pick instead. As far as signings, though, they haven't really done a ton. They did bring in Kevin Lankinen, but I don't really know if that actually matters. Lankinen is kind of a guy in net, didn't really do a ton. And for the most part, we've seen Nashville signing players like Sanford and a few others. I think Roland McCown is being brought in, Kevin Gravel as well. A lot of like bottom 6 / third pairing defenders who are more likely AHL depth, but can certainly do a role if you are not expecting much in your very depth positions. I think the biggest thing though for them is just getting Philip Forsberg back. He signed an 8-year, $68 million contract. That was obviously a situation that was hanging over their heads throughout the entire season, trying to figure out if Forsberg would come back. But he did make overtures at wanting to stay, and your superstar goal scorer coming back. I think that is probably considered a pretty big win. I just don't know if this team in the short term is really going to do much. I kind of view them in the same vein that I view Minnesota. Now, I will say that their goaltending with Jussi Saros is significantly better and probably enough to mask a lot of their issues. But, they definitely have to hope that some of their prospects start to hit because, again, goal scoring over the past couple of years, it's been better in recent times, but it's still not ideal. And Nashville itself is just kind of like a mediocre team. So we'll see how they fare next season, but I don't expect them to be like a particularly serious threat. Who I would say is probably more likely to be a pretty dangerous team is St. Louis. The Blues are just always in the top 3 of this division, and I wouldn't say that they made a ton of great signings, mostly depth players so far. Players like Thomas Greiss, Martin Furk. Greiss is a legit goalie, but aside from that, you're looking at players like Furk, Josh Lavo, and Matt Highmore. Not a ton here that I would say is crazy in terms of bringing in some fresh talent, but other than that, I mean, they did sign Nick Leddy for 4 years. I don't know why they would ever do this. Pretty solid draft as well, nothing too crazy. I will say that Ville Husso walking and being traded to Detroit probably is a bit of a loss. It's now down to Jordan Binnington and whoever else is going to back up. I don't know who their backup would be now, but the biggest loss for them is going to be David Perron. Aside from Husso, I think Perron was probably one of the few players that I'm a little bit surprised they're letting go. Maybe they just felt they didn't have money for him to come back, but he's a really good player, and I was a little bit surprised that they weren't going to bring him back because he's basically always been tied to a Blues contract one way or another, and now it's just a final separation. And I think at this point, Perron's probably not far off from retirement, but certainly he'll go to the Red Wings and be really productive. Other than that, though, I mean, you're basically looking at the same team that we saw over the past couple of years. I think Tarasenko is planning to stay so far, which, again, Tarasenko is still a fantastic winger. So this team I would definitely project in the top three. I also think Colorado is definitely, I mean, very clearly the winner of the division. And kind of looking at that, where do the Jets fit in the scheme? I think Winnipeg is honestly somewhere in like third or fourth place. But I would say if they were in that like 3 to 4 range, it's going to be a bit of a slurry with like Minnesota, Nashville, and Dallas. All of these teams have like really significant flaws, and a lot of them, their ceiling is definitely capped at a certain level below St. Louis and Colorado, and even the Blues themselves, I don't know are like a super amazing team. So overall, I do kind of think the Central Division is not going to be that good next season. A lot of depth moves and not really a ton of major acquisitions. Instead, I would say it's mostly been a lot of major departures. So a weaker division. The Pacific looks like it might be getting a little bit stronger, but for the Jets, I don't know if it's going to matter because Winnipeg hasn't really done enough to take advantage of this offseason and make some major moves to put the Jets in better straits. But I've already complained about that on previous episodes. I'm not going to waste breath over that here. Be curious to know your thoughts on the Central Division. What teams do you think are most dangerous? Be sure to let me know on social media at LO_Winnipeg Jets and at HO Living Loco or in the YouTube comments below. Let me know what your rankings are. Give me maybe even a Central Division end of regular season standings prediction. I think mine would probably be Colorado, St. Louis, maybe Minnesota, then Winnipeg, then Nashville, Dallas, and finally Chicago. I think that's probably how I would have it. But I'd love to hear what you all think. Let me know in the comments below. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Be sure to make your second listen Locked On NHL. Our Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. It's free and available on all your favorite podcasting platforms, same as Locked On Winnipeg Jets. So like, follow, and subscribe right now. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.